We are back, and we're going to continue our day with the Reflections, Tracking the Perf of Perf Programs by Mani Ramaswamy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Subramanian Ramaswamy, and I'm a technical program manager at Facebook working on performance, reliability, and efficiency, also known as health. I know my name is short and easily rolls out of your tongue, but to make it even more easier, I go by an even shorter name, Mani. And I'm going to be talking about Perflections. So, what I'm going to be talking about is showing a mirror to ourselves as a PRE team, that is a perf reliability and efficiency team. How are we measuring our success? We are very good when it comes to measuring product metrics, but how do we actually translate it to efficiency of the PRE team at large? So let's get started. So this is my daughter Ria. She was born about 11 years ago, and she is clearly my product. And and over the years, she's had growth. She has had physical growth, she's grown taller, she has had academic growth, and she's had social growth. And so she's definitely developing and growing. Now, the existential question is, am I a good father? So how much of Ria's growth is actually attributable to me as a father? Is she growing in spite of me or because of me? And I think the same question applies to us as PRE teams, or, as I said, mobile health teams. How much are we contributing to a product's top line metrics? So, for example, like the Facebook app or the Instagram app, how much are we as the PRE team contributing towards the top line metrics of that app? Now, again, as the health teams, the PRE teams, we do a lot of measurement. And I'm going to make the case that we need to actually measure three things here. One, we have to measure product top line metrics. Obviously, we have to measure things like, hey, how many regressions did we leak, or what's the startup performance, or what's the scroll performance. But we also need to measure ourselves using a set of KPIs that will track, are these translating to the top line metrics? And further, we have to also measure across stages. So it's not just in production, but we have to measure in beta, in alpha, in diff time. So only by looking at all these three measures would we actually know if we are effective as a PRE team. So the first thing is measuring the product. We all measure top line metrics. Almost everyone measures the top line metrics. We measure startup, regressions, crashes. We do that very well. Of course, we are also looking for a holy grail one metric that rules them all. And we're saying, hey, can we capture the health of an application in just one metric? And that's a very important question, but not a topic for this talk. So I'm going to leave that aside for now. And this is something generally all teams do today, measuring the product metrics. Now at Facebook, we obviously measure this too. So we use a tool called Program Runner, which allows us to track metrics and see how close we are to goal. Are we hitting goals? Are we not hitting goals? How many tasks are associated with it? We do all that jazz. And then we have another tool called CV Home, which we can further dig deeper into top line metrics. We can look at, hey, what's the version over version comparison, how many secondary metrics were impacted and by what percentage. So we can we can go further and dig deep into those metrics. And obviously further, we can even use tools that can go into the stack traces to see where the issues are. Now, the case I do want to say is product metric does not mean PRE team efficacy. As I told, my daughter's growth could be in spite of me or because of me, but you don't really know that. And same thing with product metric. Product metric, for example, startup times might improve because your engineers are starting to write good code all of a sudden. Or startup time might decrease because, hey, your engineers are writing bad code. Or there could be feature and engagement changes. So it could be because there are a lot more people using the app in a particular way where you didn't have code coverage. So all of these things can contribute to your product metric. So it's not equivalent to say, hey, I have a good product metric, and so my PRE team must be doing a good job. So how do we actually start looking at measuring the PRE metrics, PRE team's metrics? So the first way, what we all do is we start with production regressions. So we see how many regressions did we leak and how many were there? Are they trending down or trending up? So this is a reasonable start. But again, this is a top line metric. This is a top line product metric because, hey, there might be more regressions because people are writing good code. People are writing bad code. Or there could be fewer regressions because people are writing better code. So that doesn't tell you the full picture, or it doesn't really tell you more than any other product metric would do. Now we're getting a little more warm. Diagnostics efficacy. So if we say, hey, we detected a few regressions, but we were able to diagnose and root cause it within a few hours or a couple of days, now we're getting warmer. Well, this kind of translates to a little more of the efficacy of the PRE team and the tools that they provide. Further warm, like is detection. Like we have to, when there is a regression or when there is some problem, we do want to detect it rapidly. So the ability to detect those regressions rapidly definitely is a factor in PRE efficacy. So if you're quickly detecting issues, that means as a team on the detection side, we are doing a good job as a PRE team. So we are getting warmer. But in order to really get hot, there's one big thing that we are missing here. If I were to say, what's the goal of the PRE teams? Yes, it is to make sure diagnosis is easy. It is to make sure that we are detecting. But the major arbiter of success is preventing issues. How many issues did we prevent from going out into production? How many regressions, how many crashes did we prevent? And that is the main arbiter of the PRE team's efficacy. Now, prevention is not equal to detection. We could detect a lot of issues, but if you didn't really fix them, and if they leaked into production, we weren't really that that efficient there or effective there, because most of those regressions did leak into production. So even though we could have prevented them, we really didn't, and so we are not being effective. And it's important to, whenever we detect these things, to actually detect them in a tight confidence interval. So if I detected 100 issues, but only 2 turned out to be real issues, and both of them leaked into production, that's not really, you created a lot of noise, but as an effectiveness metric, you're not doing really well at that point. And finally, how quickly are we able to fix issues? This goes back to the diagnostics part where, hey, when we detect these things before they go into production, are we able to fix them quickly by root causing them and analyzing them? So with that, with those thoughts, let's actually move on to the next step, which is, it's also important to measure across release stages, because production is only one part of the job. But you have to measure in beta, in alpha, and at diff time to know that, hey, you're doing your job across all these release stages. Because only when you do it across release stages are you actually going to impact the next release stage. For example, if I do a really good job in beta, then I'm not going to have as many production issues. If I do a really good job at diff time, I'm not going to have as many issues in alpha and beta. And if I do a really good job before I go into production, I'm not going to have like post-prod issues where customers are complaining about regressions or crashes. So let's start actually putting some of this into a little more of a quantitative quantitative metrics and KPIs that we can track in a table. So as I said, first we start with, hey, how many production regressions or production issues did we actually detect? Now, as I said, detecting is not going to be the be-all of everything, because if I detected 10, but if I detected 10 30 days after production and with a high level of noise, that's not really helpful. So what we really want is how many did we detect with an SLA? That is, how many met the noise margins that we were looking for with very few false positives, and how many were detected within the time boundary that we are looking for. And this doesn't fully capture it either, because as a PRE team, we also need to look for where are the opportunities that we can be more effective. And I would say that it's detectable earlier. So maybe out of these 10 that we detected after prod, when the product went to prod, we could have detected a few of it earlier if we had the right tools or tests in place. So that's another important metric to track. Now, next comes diagnosis. Obviously, we have to find out how many issues did we actually diagnose, like how many were we able to root cause and analyze. And this alone, again, doesn't tell you the full picture because you need an SLA. How many were you actually able to diagnose it within, like, say, 24 hours or within 2 days? That's going to be the crucial part there. And ultimately, how many did we get fixed? Because this is effectively where the rubber meets the road. So if you fix 9, that is going to be the major arbiter of a PRE team's effectiveness. How many did we fix? Now we got to do the same thing in the beta stage, because when you fill it in beta, you actually know, how effective you are as a PRE team in preventing issues from going into production. So again, the same thing applies. So how much did you detect with an SLA, and how many were possibly detectable earlier than beta? How many did you diagnose, and how many did you fix? And keep in mind, anything that you didn't fix is going to go into production. And so that number is going to tell you how successful you are. If this number is high, relative, if most of the issues are fixed in the beta stage, you're going to have very few issues in the production stage. And we can keep playing this game. We can do it in alpha. A similar story here in alpha. Now, one of the things you would actually notice is when you go from prod to beta, you would actually see an order of magnitude increase. But beta to alpha, you may not see it because for the most part, alpha doesn't have as many samples, and you may not have as much coverage and users to detect a lot of issues. And you could play this game all the way to diff time. How many are we detecting? How many are we diagnosing? How many are we fixing? Again, like, this will give you a snapshot of how effective you are as a PRE team. And the second part this also provides is, what are your opportunities for improvement? Like, if I looked at this number and I said, hey, in alpha, I detected 35, but I ended up only fixing 20. That means that I have a pretty big Rubicon to cross there, because only about half of the issues that I'm detecting are really getting fixed. So either my tools are bad, or my false positive rate is high. Something is going wrong there, and I need to look into it. Or I might actually see this and go, hey, diff time, I said, say detectable earlier is 120. So diff time is the equivalent of check-in time. So if 120 issues that could be detected at diff time, perhaps we could do something at the time of developers writing code in their IDE to flag some of those issues. So maybe that's the first place where we should have actually flagged those issues. So it tells us what are the hot spots that you need to focus more as a PRE team, along with also giving you an overall view of how effective you are as a PRE team. Now, perfection is still far away. This is just a framework. It's not perfect yet, because time is a very squishy metric. The fix might be happening in 10 minutes, but the developer might be out for dinner or might be sleeping. So the wall clock time might say 10 hours or even several days. So at best, maybe time just gives you some idea of trends. The second thing to worry about is that a pre-production issue may not translate into production issues. So you might say, hey, we found like 50 issues and we fixed 50 issues. Maybe these 50 issues may not have translated into issues in production because of the way people are using it, or the differences in devices, and in most of the cases, the testing environments that you have in-house are probably going to be more pristine rather than in production when customers are using a lot of apps together at the same time. So it may not translate there. So there are issues here, and this framework gives us a start. It's not really the final stage of it. Now, as I summarize my talk, I actually want to make a call to action as well. So what we have here in this talk, what I proposed is a set of draft KPIs that will allow us to track PRE effectiveness. How effective are we as a PRE team? And I've also called out that, hey, there are lots of holes here that we need to plug in as well. Now, one of the things here is we don't really have established standards across companies or teams. Each team kind of measures things in their own way. So in an ideal world, we have actually standards where we can say, hey, there are PRE effectiveness metrics that we can actually say, these are the ones that actually say, as if these numbers are good, you're doing well as a PRE team. And I would be very happy to discuss this around virtual coffee with others in order to see, hey, if you have any ideas, how can we actually make this framework even more tighter and have it measure the PRE effectiveness? Because at the end of the day, like as a PRE team, we really want to measure not just the product top line metrics, but also how much are we contributing to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mani, for sharing your lessons of running these important performance programs. There are currently no questions in your channel. I'm going to go ahead and ask my question. So first of all, I'm pretty sure pretty much everyone is at this point interested in whether your daughter is growing because of you or in spite of you.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of both, but I like to think it's because of me.
I see. Wow, that's great. I guess on a more serious note, what would be the most important practical advice you could give others who are trying to implement similar program runner techniques or methodologies in their companies?
So what is the most important piece of advice is, I would say, the thing is, we have to measure. Now, many of the metrics that I put in that framework, it's not going to be perfect. A lot of those numbers, as I mentioned, are squishy and they're not perfect. They are going to be big holes. But I think the most important thing is to keep measuring and look for trends. Even if the numbers are not perfect, trends can actually tell us whether we are going in the right direction or the wrong direction. Because as I said, there is nothing that intrinsically ties product top line performance to how we are doing as a PRE team. So we have to measure our own metrics to ensure that, hey, we are contributing towards the top line metric in a positive way. So I would say measure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Shalvik Roy actually has a question in the Q&A. How do you measure and track false positives?
Yeah, so the way that, how do you measure and track is you essentially, when it comes to detection, you are going to have a detector which says, hey, anything greater than, say, 5% is a regression. Let's call it that. And so we will now have a count of regressions or potential regressions. Maybe we have 50 of them. Now, at some point, what we are also going to have to do is, in these 50, depending on how big the numbers are, somebody is actually going to take a look at it and fix it. Especially, at production time, if you see something flagged, people are going to take a look at it. And of those, if we actually find there are only 10 or 15 that were real, and the 35 were just red herrings, we kind of know what the false positives are. So in an ideal world, it's all automated. But in today's world, at least the world that we are in, many of these cases, false positives, we are actually manually trying to find out, hey, this is a false positive. Now, as our tools get better, as we have more insight into maybe, there are some ML training models that we can apply in some of these things, or even just the fact that, hey, we know, there are 100 issues, of which 15 of them we fixed, and we got the performance to where we were. That itself brought us back all the regressions. Then we can possibly look at it and say, well, those 35 others must have been false positives because we fixed a few issues and we got all the regressions back. So it may have been just spoofing as another one. So no perfect answer there. Today, most of it is manual. Detecting false positives is manual. You actually have a developer look at it and say, yeah, this is not a real issue. It's just noise.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mani, for your talk and answering questions.